Y'all ready for the word? Yeah? You sure? All right, good. We are in our Lose Yourself series. For those who are new, we started this year out talking about this concept of when we look around socially and culturally, we see just how much people are struggling both with things like anxiety and depression and just the intensity of division and brokenness, and it just feels more immense than it ever has in our life. And yet, we at the same time, we live in a world that says, hey, you got to love yourself and your beauty is within and you got to be great. And if you just look at yourself and pump yourself up, you'll feel good. And yet nobody seems to be feeling better. And so we've been talking about, in the first half, we looked at some of the self-interest that leads to our dysfunction and our mental struggles. And those were in negative terms. This little section that we're doing for the next few weeks is a little harder because we're looking at positive things that have, in their essence, they have something good and beautiful about them, and yet we do them so wrong they end up impacting our lives negatively. And so today we're going to read for this. We're going to stand for the reading of God's Word, and we're going to read. So if you'll stand with me, we're going to read from John 15 again as we did last week. But we're going to start this week with Matthew 22. And this is about the love of God. And so if you'll read with me, it says this: hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Jesus with this question: "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands." If you'll flip over to John 15. "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you." This is Jesus speaking to his disciples, and I believe it still is for us who follow him today. He says, "As the Father has loved me, so Jesus himself has loved you. Now remain in my love," he says. "If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. So last week we talked about self-love. And if you weren't here, you need to catch it. This is kind of a part 2. I'm going to give a little recap to what we talked about last week because it's an extension of it. But we talked about how with self-love, it is one of those things that sounds good. And the way we talk about it, we talked about Lizzo last week as the emblem or symbol of self-love, and yet she's embroiled in these broken relationships and controversies, and she's struggling with things internally of how people judge her, and she's going through all of these things that the whole self-love movement was supposed to say. You don't need to care what anybody says outside of you, and you just need to love yourself, and you'll love people better, and it hasn't worked out. And here are some famous things you might hear when we talk about it. I spoke with my staff and I said, hey, what do you think self-love is? And here are common tropes you hear. You can't love others without truly loving yourself first. This is the number one thing. When you ask people what it is, it means you got to love yourself first. And then maybe you can better love others. But the beginning of the most beautiful relationship is with yourself. Right? Number 2, you can't pour from an empty pot. That's a phrase that we use to say, I've got to be filled up so that I can love better. If you fill me up, if you take care of me, if I take care of me, then I can give out and love better from that. So I got to take care of me. Right? And then a third one is the most famous, I think, when people describe why you need to love yourself. And it makes the most sense. And that's the problem with all these. They actually sound really good. And in theory, they sound good. And they should be good. And yet, when you play them out, this has been the basis of the whole series, is when you play them out, are they really good? Do they work? That's the question I asked last week. It sounds pretty. It sounds beautiful. It sounds so inspiring. Does it work? And so here's the third one. In a plane crash, if the plane's going down, you've got to put on your own mask first. And then give it to somebody next to you. And this is the symbol we use for self-love. We say, you got to take care of you first, and then you'll be able to love others. And if you don't love yourself first, you're not going to love others well. And it sounds good, which makes this series very challenging because I'm going to say no. So why doesn't it work? Because that seems to be like a beautiful metaphor that just works. We're going to talk about that today. I want to go back to this philosopher, Rousseau. We talked about him last week, so I just want to give you a recap because, as I shared last week, this guy is known historically as one who really started this new concept of the self. See, prior to Rousseau, there might have been some smattering discussions about this, but overall, nobody really believed that loving and focusing on yourself was a good. In fact, it would be called a moral character issue to think about yourself all the time in comparison to the greater things around you and others around you. Then Rousseau comes along and he introduces this concept of self-love. And this is where it shifts. For all of the centuries, almost everybody knew that men were not naturally good. And then this philosophy of the Enlightenment and Romanticism comes along and goes, no, we are actually naturally beautiful and good inside. It's society that corrupts us. So Rousseau shares about two forms of self-love. One is amour de soi. And amour de soi is the innate interest we have in our own survival and comfort. A self-love that involves one's feelings for oneself alone. It doesn't need anybody else without any intervening concerns about how I'm seen by others. What he talks about is he says, there's society and it creates systems of marriage contracts and what that's supposed to look like, and economic systems and what success and good and virtue looks like. And it's in society that we start comparing ourselves to others and going, am I good enough? Am I strong enough? And we compete, and that's where fighting comes from, and that's where injustice comes from, and that's where anger comes from. It is society putting these things upon me to say, this is what you must be. But if you just left me to my own devices, if I was born in a jungle somewhere and not into this societal system, I would have amour de soi. I would be innately self-loving. And this self-loving would preserve myself, but not at the extent of hurting somebody else. I wouldn't compare. I wouldn't envy other people. I would just naturally love myself and therefore love others. In fact, one historian put it this way, that it became Rousseau who was the first to posit that original self-love, the innate self-love, amour de soi, is the source of compassion. It is, if I learn to love myself innately, I will be compassionate to others. You don't have to have ever read Rousseau to know that that's what we now believe as a whole today. But this is where it comes from. Now, last week I shared with you about Lizzo, but I also shared with you about the French sailors who were influenced by Rousseau. And it's important to recap because the question was, it sounds beautiful. Loving myself is the beginning of compassion for the world. So these French sailors buy all into this enlightenment and what Rousseau's talking about. And they go to this island where there's these Maori tribesmen. They're aboriginals. And it was believed that, again, if you were not in a society with all these social structures and marriage structures and economic structures, that you would be more loving or there'd be more peace, less envy. So they go. And they actually make friends, and it turns out to be true. All these Maori tribesmen love these guys. They're talking, they're getting to know them. They're fixing their boats for 5 weeks on this island until one day the Maori tribesmen come up, they hit them over the head, they capture them, and then eat them. This is a real historical story. And it's crazy because the whole concept is if you just left them alone and society didn't tell you all these measures, you would just be running around the jungles going, everybody's awesome. Apparently you eat people. That's what is more natural. So the question was, it sounds beautiful, but is it true? Cannibals say, probably not. Okay? But then I got to thinking, there's a part I didn't share last week that goes into this week. Rousseau, who says, it's these marriage systems that make us, and these political systems and economic systems that make us hate and fight and hurt each other. Rousseau had 5 children. I have 5 children, so I connected. And Rousseau, in all of his love, took them to a Paris orphanage, dropped them off, and left them because he didn't want the hassle. Now I follow Rousseau. I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. It's sick, right? It's insane. This man who says it's the social world, it's the systems that make you hate each other. He goes, in his innate goodness, goes and does something so unnatural. He takes 5 children and goes, go get raised by somebody else. This is too much for me. And so, yes, you can't judge a whole philosophy on the hypocrisy of a man the same way you can't judge a whole religion because some Christians are hypocritical. But his whole philosophy is you've got to find the innate good to be compassionate, and he goes and does one of the most atrocious things. Because this is what it got me thinking about. There are studies on Romanian orphanages where children were left in these orphanages, and they weren't really touched, they weren't cuddled, but they were fed, and they did survive, but they would still die within the first 2 years, even though they were being fed, kept warm, put into a bed, because they lacked physical affection. And then when they were brought out into the real world, they didn't know how to love. They didn't know how to socialize. They had mental health disorders. They couldn't attach to people. They couldn't be healthy. And so here is the guy who posited self-love as the source of compassion doing something that is going to absolutely impact the rest of these kids' lives and ruin them. See, love does not at first come from within. That's our first core point. Why do we have so many of our disorders? Where do they come from? Where do so many of our dysfunctions, our divisions, our mental health crises, where do they come from? Well, first off, let's be clear. Love does not come at first from within. And we have to get over that. That was last week. So where does it come from? Here's what's funny. In our therapeutic world where we talk about all this stuff of self-love and taking care of oneself, we also live in a world where every therapist, when you have struggles, when you're having relationship disorders or anxiety or depression, at some point, they're not going to be like, let's look inside of you and see how much love meter you have. They do this. Do you know what they do? If you've ever been to therapy, here's what it goes. Tell me about your parents. Tell me where you came from. Tell me what happened when you were younger. Almost universally, if you don't get to that, we're never truly getting to why are you the way you are. So this is funny to live in a world where it's like everything's inside of you naturally and going, wait, everything happened outside of you. And this is why things are not functioning right. So there's a theory named attachment theory, which is very popular. You've probably heard it. And it's, what did your parents do? That's really, like, at the heart of it. It's what happened in those early years of your life. John Bowlby, who helped coin it, he essentially posited that if you watch anybody that is having disorders and dysfunctions and problems, you can always go to what was your relationship like and how did you attach healthily or unhealthy or insecurely to your family, to your parents, to those who were supposed to be above you. Okay? So essentially it says this, your first relationships form a template that acts as a prototype for all future relationships. That means the way you treat a future spouse, the way you treat your children, the way you interact with people socially, the way you make friends, all comes down to the way I love is because of how I was loved or not loved. I have learned a prototype for dysfunctional relationships if I am having all this strife and brokenness in my relationship to others. There's 4 ways in which they talk about this in attachment. Number 1, there's a secure form of love. This is, you had 2 parents, mother and father. Okay, they were involved, they were present. They let you venture out from them to explore. They weren't too uptight, they weren't too permissive. They gave you structure and boundaries, and when you fell, they came and held you. They came and loved you as you deserved, and you learned that you could trust those people. And here's the message that you got because they were there through all of your stumbles and falls and explorations. You learned that I am worthy of love, number 1, and that others are worthy of love, that I can trust them to love me. So I can trust people who are worthy to be loved and trusted, and I love myself because somebody has shown that I am of value and consistently. There's a consistency to it, right? Now, if something goes wrong there, where your parent maybe perhaps gets to a place where they are either not there, or they passed away, or they're emotionally distant, or they worked 80 hours a week and weren't really involved in your life, or they were just a little temperamental and cold, and when you were having emotions, they're like, just be quiet, we don't need to cry about those things. You might become what's called insecurely attached, and avoidant. Avoidant means I am worthy of love, but others are not capable of loving me. I can't count on people to be there. They disappear, they abandon me, or they're just not emotionally available. I cannot count on others to be there. So now I go out into my relationships with people, and that's how I treat people. I go, I don't really need anybody. Any of those like me that you just go, I don't need anybody. I got this. I can figure it out. And you keep people at a distance, and when people get too clingy or too emotional, you're like, you're annoying. Don't touch me. I got this. Okay? You're asking too many questions. Sorry, I'm doing therapy right now. Sorry. You become avoidant. You push people away a little bit because I can do this by myself. This is what you learned as your prototype. Or perhaps you're anxious. This is when you're in a temperamental relationship or have a parent or parents who it's like you never know if you can count on them. Maybe one minute they're like, I love you. The other minute they're angry and volatile. Or maybe one day you come home and they're cold and depressed and they can't connect with you even though you keep trying. I want you to connect. And then one day they are like, hey, how's it going? But you never know if today they're going to be present or they're going to be distant. Or today they're going to be gone or angry. And there's a volatility to it. So you become anxious. And you learn this like, I'm not worthy of consistent love, but I need others to love me. I really need people to be consistent in my life. And so what do? You become jealous. You become clingy. Some people become promiscuous and sexually dysfunctional in a lot of ways because they just so desperately, they're finding all these ways to find love that they couldn't consistently get elsewhere. So I'm anxious. I'm not worthy of love. Therefore, I need as many people as to pour into me as much love as possible. And then lastly, the hardest one is disorganized attachment. You'll see this in a lot of foster kids and a lot of people who've been abandoned or abused or neglected extremely. And you got both messages. I am not worthy of love, and I can't trust others. Now, these people, they might cling to somebody and then do something to push them away. It's a way of controlling their relationships, of going, you will not leave me, I'll leave you. And now they can be overly friendly, but they're friendly with everyone, and then one day they just abandon everyone because they can't trust people, and they can't get love, and they don't need love. So one minute they're avoidant, and the other minute they're anxious, and it's disorganized. Okay? Because they've gotten two messages. I am not worthy of love, and I cannot trust and love others. And a lot of times you'll see this with abusive people, people who have addictions, self-destructive behaviors. This is where a lot of this comes from. But even more so than what we've learned in attachment theory, this is for all parents, this is for moms and dads alike, it affects how we love. But even more so is the impact of the father. I'm only going to give you two statistics for lack of time, but there is literally pages and pages of studies on this that are so outrageous. 85% of children, according to the Center for Disease Control, who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes. That's 20 times the average. 90% of homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. And that is from the Department of Health and Human Services. Studies on the prison population, almost 85% from fatherless homes. The impact of a father who is not present, not there, abusive, is so much even greater than just the base impact of not having your foundations and secure foundations. 1 in 4 children are fatherless today. And many others have a distant relationship or that's non-existent relationship to their father. The impact is outrageous. So you might go to therapy and they would dig into your past, but at some point you're going to have to go, tell me about your relationship to your father. Tell me what the nature of that relationship is. Tell me how you experienced love from that role, or how you didn't. See, point number 2 is we love based upon those who first loved us. This is our prototype. Based on how those who first loved us, this is how we love others. This is how your romantic relationships will look. This is how your parenting might look. This is how your closest friendships might look. Okay, we love based on those who first loved us. And that's also how I love myself. Am I self-sufficient, meeting all my own needs? I might be avoidant. Am I constantly insecure and not feeling like I'm ever good enough? I might be anxiously attached. Am I self-destructive? It's still this sense of I'm important and yet I'm not good enough and yet I am good enough and I'm confused and I'm just destructing in chaos. One of the most influential writers in Christian history is St. Augustine. And he writes in this book on Confessions, he talks about he had a strained relationship with his father who died when he was about 17 years old. His father was not really present. He was a pagan worshiper. And his mother was a Christian, so his mother really sustained him. But there came a point where he just ran wild, and he shares about these erotic adventures that he has. And he's living this, lascivious life and doing inappropriate things and living in sin. But he says this, the single desire that dominated my search for delight was simply, I want to be loved and to love. The number one thing that drove my behaviors was I was wanting to love somebody deeply and to be loved deeply. And if we're honest, this is what we can begin reflecting. Why am I trying to be so successful? Because I want somebody to love me in the way that I didn't feel I was worthy of love. I'm trying to get that. Why do I work on my gym bod? You sit there and tell me it's for your mental health. If you have abs over 40, no, it's not. That's for somebody to look at you. Okay? Why do I do it? Because I want somebody to praise me, to love me. Why do we cheat? Why is there so much friction in my relationships? Why do I fight and grasp for everybody to do what I want? Why am I controlling with my children? Why am I forcing them to be so perfect all the time? Why do I hold them to such high standards? Why do I ensure that they have to have perfect grades? Because it's not because I love them. It's because I want to be honored and loved and respected and show that I am worthy of love. I've done right. I've done well. People can praise me. It's not because it's been proven to be good for them. Why do I have so much anger? Why is there so much infighting amongst my spouse and my family? It's because I have this desire to simply be loved and to love, and I'm not getting what I want, the love of myself. Augustine famously stated that the essence of sin is disordered love. That at the heart of sin is disordered love. And in fact, he says all of humanity's failures, the core of humanity's ruin was caused by a love of self back in the Garden of Eden. It wasn't simply a nature of, I was tempted. It was, I don't want to love God first. I want to love me first. I want what I want first. And this is what Augustine says, that this is the root of all disorder. Mental health disorders, sinfulness, brokenness, division. The root starts at, what about me first? He writes in his writing called On Christian Doctrine, he says, a just and a good person is a person who has rightly ordered his love. I want you to pay attention to this quote. Okay, there's a lot to it, but it's a special one. A right and a just person is a person who has rightly ordered his love so that he does not love what is wrong to love, or fail to love what should be loved, or love too much what should be loved less, or should love less what should be loved more. He says you're getting your love out of whack. There are things that you should not love, but for your own, this makes me happy. You are willing to do it at the expense of things that you should love more, God and others. I'm willing to get high at the expense of God and others. I'm willing to abandon my kids to an orphanage for my own comfort. You have loved more something that you should have loved less. I should love less that which should be loved, that deserves to be loved more. I have. God deserves to get more praise and more love. If I believe in that, He deserves my day. He deserves my attention. He deserves my heart. And I have definitely loved Him less. And this is the beginning, Augustine is saying, of disorder. You want to look at your life and go, disordered friendships, disordered family, disordered life, disordered future, disordered mentally. You can start getting to this root. Somewhere in there, you are loving things too much that are harmful to others. You are loving things too little that really should be ordered first in your life. You are not loving enough or loving too much. So this is our third point today. Disordered love produces disorders. Disordered love produces disorders. Love does not come from within us. Let's get that out of the way. We love because based upon those who first loved us, and disordered love produces most of our disorders in this world. Getting things out of whack. All right, I'm going to let you in on a creepy little secret about me. You want to know it? All right. Yes. All right, I know it's twisted, but I fall asleep to Dateline almost every night. I know it's twisted. It's a bunch of murder, and I know subconsciously this is probably not healthy. Like, that's what I'm listening to as I go to peace at night. But it's that guy Josh's voice where it's like, now tell me about why you were so upset about this. And I'm just like, ah. So I sleep to Dateline. So one night I was like half asleep. I have an earbud in so my wife doesn't give me the stink eye. Got my little phone so she doesn't see the light. Sorry, again, therapy, sorry. And I'm looking and I'm listening, but I'm like falling asleep, and I hear this line. There's a detective on Dateline. And he says this, he goes, in all of history, the number one motive for murder is love. And I woke up and I'm like, there's my sermon. I'm writing sermons for you while I sleep. He says the number one motive for murder is consistently love. And it doesn't matter how, Dateline can be 2 hours, and they might be like, was it the neighbor? Was it this person, the garbage man? No, it's always the husband, wife, or children. That's who it is, right? It's always a boyfriend. There's always a romantic interest. So how does that occur that the number one reason people kill each other is on the basis of love? It's because your love is disordered. Yes, you want love and you want them to love you, but they aren't giving you enough. So you went to somebody else and got into this different relationship where there's cheating, and now you want to get married, but you don't want to look bad to your Mormon family. This was like last week. But so you kill them. Or they are not treating you right and giving you what you want, so you get in a fight until you just lose all control and you kill them because they couldn't meet your needs. They cheated on you, or they just aren't loving you enough or talking to you enough, and you fight until it becomes ugly because you loved yourself. At the end of the day, I thought I loved you, but what I really loved is I needed you to fill me with the love I didn't get. I needed you to fill this vacuous hole in me to feel like I am loved enough. And it got me thinking about this again. Last week I got to see this beautiful, like one of those beautiful little 4-month-old babies I've ever seen. And he was a foster baby. And this grandma was holding this baby, and I just wanted to take this baby home. He was so beautiful. You know, we've done foster care, and it just brought me to tears because she told me that somebody had this baby in the street, went to the hospital to take care of the baby, and then just took off. And I'm like, how? How do you have this precious thing that calls your life to something meaningful and greater and deeper and beautiful, and you go, I'm out? How? It makes me angry. It makes me sad. I'm sitting here crying. I'm like, what? Who does this? Who loses their children and then is just like, I don't have time to be present with them. It's too hard. Who's like Rousseau that goes, I'm going to give my children up to the orphanage. I got an addiction I just don't want to kick. I understand it's hard, but this is the innately the most important thing in the world. This is bigger than myself. And they go, I gave it up so they could be loved better. Yeah, but that might be true. But you just loved yourself. You loved your comfort. You loved your addiction. You loved your feeling that made you feel better, or it made you feel overwhelmed, or you aren't good enough, but you weren't willing to work for love. You weren't willing to sacrifice. You weren't willing to do the hard thing. And I don't get it. I should. But see, those are the extreme examples. But all of us have this. For instance, if a parent overprotects their child, when you go, I'm not going to let you go anywhere. I'm not going to let you fall. I'm not going to let you fail. I'm going to do your homework for you. I was once leading this group, and there was this person who was sharing about how they were abandoned to gangs, and they didn't have their parents didn't care what they did, and they failed school. So now, you know what I'm going to do? And it was just this intense, and it's like, I make sure every day they finish their homework, and I tell them, you better do it or you're going to fail. And if I didn't keep them on task every single day, they would fail. And you know that they're feeling this in the name of love. That's because I love them. And yet, what you're doing to this child, it's like the child who is a baby who's learning to sprint and fall and know that they can come back and fail and come back and find safety. You're saying, you are not worthy of that. You need me desperately. And the reason you do that is for you. I don't want to feel bad that you failed. I don't want to feel like I failed you as a parent. I don't want to feel like you're doing poorly in this world because that reflects me. It is self-love because it's not what's best for your child according to child development to not let them fail. So that's how we love ourselves more than the growth of another. If a parent neglects their child, that's self-love. I'm busy. I have my own desires, my own feelings. I have my work. I got to work 80 hours a week. I'm sorry, I can't be there. I once talked to these really wealthy men that I knew. And I was struggling to be a decent parent. And all I had was a nonprofit, and I was doing school. And I'm like, I don't know how to be a good parent and be present and how to run all these things. And these guys had like 6 businesses all over the state of California. And I'm sitting with them. I go, how do you do it? How are you present? How are you with them? Like the way they need and do all this stuff. And they go, well, we don't. Like, we hope that one day they're going to see how much we provided for them, because we've worked so hard for their future. And you know what the Romanian villages teach us? It's not enough to provide food, shelter, and a BMW. It's not enough to get them a pink Mercedes. It doesn't do it because they still die for lack of nurture, for lack of presence, for lack of closeness and intimacy. And so that's how you still love yourself more out of order. Because I want to be successful, and hopefully those I'm supposed to love will get the outcomes of that. So here are more examples. If you love your comfort more than God, you love out of order. If you go around going, I just don't have time because God, I'm busy and, I got these things and I'm tired, and so I got on Instagram and then I didn't sleep and then I couldn't go to church. You love your comfort more than God. It's out of order, and let me tell you, you're going to have disorders. If you don't have time for the things that are greater than you, it's out of order. and you're not going to love other people well, and you're not going to love yourself well. You know, if you can sleep in 15 hours, you might think you're taking care of yourself and call it self-love, but you're going to hate yourself the next day if you build a habit of that. Do you love your nation more than you love God and others? Patriotism, that's not a bad thing. But if you love it more than you love God, you will fight people, and you will put them on ends, and you will cut people off who disagree with you because you have a disordered love. You have placed worldly things above God and people. You do not love God first, and you do not love people second. You love your ideology the most, or success more than God and others, or your hobbies more than God and others, or your identity, or your race, or your sex life. Whatever you put above others and God will become disordered. You start saying, well, this is and here's how you know. Anybody who disagrees with me, I cut off. Anybody who gets in my way of obtaining these things that I think will make me feel better about myself, I fight, I argue, I cut off, I place boundaries because they don't fully agree with me. This is how you know that your love of yourself has been disordered. Because these things come before God, come before faith, come before church, come before others, comes before your relationships. You're willing to split your family for the things you want for your comfort, sex, whatever, success. Another way of saying that biblically would be you give them your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength at the expense of God and others. And that's the challenge you have to think through today as we talk through this. What do I give my heart, my affections? What do I give my mind, my attention? What do I give my work to and my life to and everything else? That's your order. Wherever your attention is, that's at the top of your order of love. Whatever, let's put it this way. I said this last service. How many of you can spend an hour on your favorite hobby and it just flies by? How many of you, after I've preached for an hour, are like, I got to go? It's funny, but it's not funny. I know this because I know statistically almost none of us do anything with God after Sunday, and yet you don't have time. Time flies when you're in love. Do you know that? Time flies when you're in love. When your affections and your heart and mind, things go so fast, you're like, that was an hour, I want another hour. I want more time. When you're not in love, when it's secondary or third on your list or fourth on your list, you go, I want to get to what I love. You give them all your heart. And so what do? Anyone who gets in your way, you ignore, you smother, or you abuse, or you cut off. But Augustine says this, and I think this is a beautiful quote. I don't have it up there, but he says this. He's talking about the book of John, and he's studying this passage, and he says, for in some inexplicable way, I know not what, but everyone that loves himself does not love, and not God, does not love himself. And whoever loves God and not himself, he actually ends up loving himself. That's the paradox of our faith. The more you go, I got to love me, you're actually, and then you put God secondary or not at all or not involved in others, you actually will end up not loving yourself. Rousseau once later wrote about how guilty he felt for abandoning his children because he took care of him first instead of the social structures that would lead him to love others before himself. Because he didn't love God. Because he didn't love others because he loves God. And that's what Augustine says. He goes, those who love God and not themselves, somehow they end up going, I like me. And those who go, I'm going to love myself, end up being anxious, depressed, broken, hurting, fighting, divided. Somehow they don't love themselves, ironically. So what is the order of love? Let's go to the scriptures, what we read today. The Bible gives us an order to right love. And anything out of this order, we believe God designed the universe and he designed it. It says God is love, that God has designed all things according to who he is, and all things are in him. And that means if he's designed to order and you do it out of order, it's like putting gas into your oil tank, in the wrong part of your car. You can't put things out of order and have them work. And here's what it says: as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. And in 1 John 4, he says, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from... Where does it come from? This is how God showed his love for us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is how God first loved us. So point number one, he loved us sacrificially and unconditionally. No matter how great your relationships are on this planet, almost none of them are truly sacrificial and truly unconditional. You know, you ask anybody, why do you love me? Why do you love me? And what are you going to say? You guys can do it. Why do you love me? Huh? Because I'm your son. Okay. Why do you love me? Father? Thank you. My hair. Yes. My brother's gritting his teeth right now in jealousy. This is those systems. Don't envy. You can go, oh, I love you because of how hard you work. I love you because of how, you do this for me. And I love you how you take care of me. But see, all those things are conditions. I love you because you're pretty. I love you because you're funny. And then I stop being pretty and I stop being funny and I stop being great, or I fail you, and love starts to dissipate in most relationships. See, we have a Father who says, I love you first before you've done anything. There's nothing you've done. It wasn't about your performance. It wasn't about your beauty. It wasn't about your goodness. In fact, it says in Romans, it says that there are almost nobody in this world who would die for even a righteous man, who would lay down their life for a righteous man. And yet, our Father in heaven laid down his life for those while they were still sinners. So in our life, it's like you might sacrifice. If your child was about to get hit by a car, you might sacrifice your life for him. But on the day-to-day, you're like, you go figure it out. I'm busy. You don't sacrifice. And it's not unconditional necessarily. You might say you love, but it's like only to the extent that you're not hurting me. And yet I have a God who says, you have hurt me. You have abandoned me. You have cheated on me. You have left me. You don't care about me, and I will die for you. It's based on nothing you've done, sacrificially and unconditionally. My first form of love is that he loved me first before I've done anything, before my hair grew, before I was pretty, before I was good, which I'm not. There was one who loved me. So that's the order of love. Number one, God so loved me first, that he laid down his life for the world. You know, one of the biggest crocs out there is this metaphor on the airplane mask. Okay? And this is the thing, as I talked about, it's like the self-love movement. It's like, you gotta put on your own mask first before you can love somebody else. Right? But they're full of it. That's not actually what's happening. It's not a bad metaphor, except it's stupid. You want to know why? Because here's what they're having you believe today. It's that you're doing this. You're blowing your own air. That you're saving yourself. I just got to love me better before I can love somebody else. You're not getting filled with pure oxygen from you when you put on your airplane mask. You know where it's coming from? A higher source with a purer oxygen. Do you know that? It didn't come from you. You didn't have it. So yes, you couldn't give it to somebody else, but you didn't have it. But the current modern self-love movement says, blow your own air. It's stupid because you don't innately have it. I need a higher source. I need to be connected to something that brings me purer oxygen so that I can go and love somebody else. It is not within me. So it is a great metaphor, but it's poorly understood. You're not getting what you need from you. You're getting it from something much higher and much purer. And it's like having imperfect parents. It doesn't matter how good they were. It's never going to be enough. But many of you probably had a lack of a father or imperfect parents or abuse even. And you need to hear this, that there is an order to love. You experienced disordered love done to you. Somebody loved themselves. At the root of it, like Augustine says, right? At the root of humanity's brokenness is the love of self. Somebody loved themselves before you. Somebody took somebody's life out of their own self-interest. Somebody disappeared because they wanted to start their own business or family. Somebody bounced on you because they wanted something, and you experienced disordered love, and this is why this matters. That does impact you. Go into any therapy session and we go, tell me about your family. Tell me about your father. But you have a father with more pure love, more unconditional love, more sacrificial love, and he loved you before you'd ever done anything. And then it says this, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind and with all your soul. And this is the first and greatest commandment. So God has loved me first. So first, in the order of how I give my life to things, is I am to love God with my work, with my affections, with my attention. Because think about this, when a child, so we talked about attachment, right? And here's kind of some of the studies. When a parent that is trustworthy is in the room, a child who is healthy, who is secure, ventures out, and they try things, and they look, and they fail, and they stumble, and they fall, but then they look, and the one they trust is still there with them. And if they hurt and they scrape their knee and they get bloodied, they run back and they find comfort and security in their arms. And if they get scared and they realize they've ventured too far, they come back and they know they can count on the person being there. But you know what happens when you're securely attached? You watch your caregiver to know that that's where my safety is. You watch your parent and your father and you go, I want to be like them. I want to be near them because that's the one who loves me purely. And when they're cooking, you want to go cook with them. And when they're sweeping the floor, you want to go sweep with them. You want to work alongside of them. You want to be in their arms. You want to listen to them. You want to mimic their cooing in their faces. Because you're securely attached. Because you've learned I can be with this one who loves me. I am worthy of love and they are worthy of my love. And so what do you give them? You give them your attention, but here's the problem. Augustine says this, you and I, we do not need to be taught to think about ourselves. We do not have to be taught to love ourselves. I know that goes against conventional wisdom today, but hear him out. He says this, the human mind is so constituted that at no time does it not remember and understand and love itself. Hence, it's that well-known and primary commandment, you shall love the Lord your God. Here's what Augustine is saying. He's saying we have to give a commandment to give God your attention, your affection, your work, your time. You know why? Because nobody has to teach you to pay attention to yourself. You think, oh, I got to love myself. No, you're always thinking about yourself. Even when you're killing yourself to help others, it's because it's going to give you something. When you're smothering your children, it's going to give you something out of it. You're always thinking about yourself. The mind doesn't have to be taught to think about itself. That's what Augustine is saying. You may not feel good about yourself, but you do love yourself. You love yourself so much that you always think about how you're not good enough. You always think about what people aren't doing enough for you. You always think about how you're taken for granted. You love yourself even if you're hating yourself right now because you love thinking about you all the time. And Augustine is saying, no mind has to be taught that, like social emotional learning right now. We have to teach people to love themselves. No, we always think about ourselves. You have to teach me to cast my thoughts to something bigger than myself. That's what you have to teach me to do. I don't need help ignoring God. I do that easily. I need help giving him my time. I need to cast my thoughts upon him. I need to love him with my heart, with my affections. I need to learn to worship him with my heart and have affections for him. I need to be in his presence like a caregiver. So it says, love the Lord your God. It's a command because you won't naturally do it. Go be near your Father. Go love him. Go listen to him. Go work alongside of him. Give your life to the one who has loved you first. He first loved you. Now make your life about the one you can trust who has loved you. And then it says, but if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. We love because he first loved us. Do you want to love better, church? Do you want your relationships to be healthier? Do you want less division, less brokenness? Do you want less mental health issues? Do you want to feel love and to give love? Are you tired of people leaving you all the time because you're cantankerous? Do you want to be loved and to feel love? Here's what it says. God first loved you. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and love others as yourself. Do you know what it doesn't say? It never says in the Bible, love yourself. You know why? Because when I really have affections and my attention and worship of somebody who already loves me, no matter how imperfect I am, I realize I'm worthy of love. Secure attachment number one. I realize I'm worthy of love, don't I? I am so worthy of love that Christ died for me, even while I was still a sinner. Number two, I realize that other people are worthy of my love. Because it says in the scriptures, God is love. And Jesus says, the way the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now go love one another. You are to love others as Jesus has loved you. And how has Jesus loved me? Here's how you break it down so it's not just a theory. Friends, I'm asking you right now, participate. Has God been patient with you in your life? Have you screwed him over time and time again with your lack of ignorance, with your ignorance and your sin and your addictions? Has he died for you? Have you died for him? Have you given your whole life to him? He is patient with you. Love is patient. So if God's love is flowing into me and I'm sitting there going, I need to be connected. I don't have patience in me. I need it. I need to be connected and connected to the one that I love, that has loved me first, and his patience flows into me. And now I can help somebody else with patience who's going to fail me, who's going to love me imperfectly, who's not going to give me and return to me the love I've given them. I don't get it from them. I get it from the one who loved me first. And I give it. Has he been kind to you, church? Has he been graceful with you, church? I need his grace. And the more I'm connected, the more I'm in him, my mind, my heart, his grace fills me with a purer grace. So when I look at somebody and I'm frustrated and I'm angry, I don't need to divide because his grace flows into me. I don't need it from you. I need it from him so I can give it to you. And I do not get it from myself. It's not there. I am not innately graceful. I am not innately patient. We love others because Christ first loved us. And Jesus says, as the Father has loved me. Even Jesus is like, the Father's love flows into me. The Father's love sacrifices, and in me I sacrifice unconditionally my love for you because the Father's love is in me and I am in him. It flows down. And Augustine says this, if you love the Lord, in so doing you will love yourself. Says, when you love God and your affections and your time and your worship and your mind and your heart are geared towards him, you go, I'm worthy of love, and I can give and I can trust to love other people and that they are worthy of love because of how God has loved me. And you know what? When you love God well and you know he loves you first and you love other people well even when they're being jerks, you walk away going, I kind of like me. I like who I've become and who he's changing me to be. Because I don't need it from you, and I don't get it from me. It's not about me, and it's not about you. It's about he loves me, and when I love like he loves me, his love is made complete, and that means for me too. That's how you love yourself. And nowhere in there is there a, I need to love me. I just do. Friends, do you love yourself too little? Do you look at yourself with an anxiousness going, I'm not worthy of love. I need people. I need attention. I need a gym bod. I need people to love me. I need people to give me attention. And when they don't, I'm going to just beg for it and cry for it and yell for it. Do you love yourself too little? I'm going to ask you this question. Tell me about your relationship to your Father. And I don't mean your earthly one. That has an impact. I think it's been fairly well proven. But tell me about your relationship to the Father. Are you near him? Do you run to his comfort? Do you believe the gospel, or do you still believe I have to be good to be loved? And if you still believe that's the wrong gospel, it's a little switch of order. Do you see it? One little switch of order. I love you, now stay near me and love me, versus I'm near and doing what you asked, will you love me? There's anxiety. Get the wrong order, get disorder. You see it? Do you love yourself too much? Now, the problem with me asking this question is if you love yourself too much, you don't know that you love yourself too much. Right? But if you don't know that you love yourself too much, here's how you look. How many of your relationships are always in friction? How hard do you find it to worship God and give him your heart, mind, and soul? How much do you fight or take what you want at the expense of others, and they tell you so? Maybe you don't think you do, but they tell you so. Your closest relationships to you will tell you how you really are. The ones I love in a spouse or children or my closest friendships, they're the ones who tell me how I really am because they see me. And if I'm always in friction with people around me, not just at home, but elsewhere where I'm close to people, it's probably because my needs and my comforts and my desires have been ordered above God and others. His grace, his patience are not flowing through me. And if you have a lot of friction, you might have a disordered love. Tell me about your relationship to your Father. Do you still think of him as too strict? Do you still think he's going to punish you for not being perfect? Do you still think he doesn't care, it doesn't matter, that he's distant, that God is somewhere off and you don't know him? Then you got the wrong order of your relationship. God loved you first and laid his life down for you, not based on anything you've ever done. Now, in return, love God. Give him your affections, your worship. Give him your time. Let an hour feel like 10 minutes because you want to be in his presence. Go learn what he says and do what he says and teach. He says, you'll remain in my love if you stay near me doing what I do, serving as I serve, working as I worked for you. And then love others as that love flows into you. As you connect and you go, God, I want to run to you. I want to be connected to you. I want to experience the fullness of your grace, your love. I want to be present. I'm so tired of being filled with crap. I want to be filled with your graciousness so that it flows out of me for the sake of others. And in so doing, you will love yourselves. If you want to be loved, and if you want to love to overflowing, this is where it comes from. Are you going to the source? Tell me about your relationship to your Father. And change that relationship to your Father if you're experiencing that type of love disorder. Amen? Let's worship together.